LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the September 6th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. This weekend I have the 10 best, most newsworthy clips that I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for which would be a really informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. My topic for the program, here, let me pause that player there. My topic is Trump must go for so many reasons. Trump must go. I mean, there's, of course, the coronavirus crisis still raging, which Trump has done his best to ignore and blame on others. Now there's this Atlantic article quoting multiple anonymous sources, probably former White House Chief of Staff John Kelly and former White House or former Trump Defense Secretary Jim Mattis. Those are the most likely anonymous sources that Trump disparages American troops, calls them suckers and losers. And then also Trump is questioning the legitimacy of the election. He hasn't even lost yet, telling people to vote twice who support him. And I'll be discussing all of that with the regular newsmaker clips and corporate news summaries, as usual, in this week's live clip roundup. The political comedy that I'm going to start with for you all is actually just another screen capture of a news story. You know, last week I showed how the Hurricane Laura had knocked down a Confederate statue that this Louisiana town had voted to keep. Well, this happened over the weekend. This is a New York Times story, although this was reported a lot of places. At least 4 boats sink during Trump boat parade in Texas, officials say. And not only is that like a metaphor for the Trump campaign in a lot of ways, but the reason those boats sank is because there were like big boats and little boats, and the Trump supporters with the big boats didn't follow the rules to protect the people in the little boats, because who cares about the people in the little boats if you're a Trump supporter, right? Isn't that another kind of even bigger metaphor for how the whole Trumpism itself is? Who cares about the people in the little boats? Let them sink. That's the point I wanted to make with the political comedy. It's not a clip, it's just a capture, but you can, or a screen capture of a news story. I put a link to the entire New York Times news story down in the video description. As usual, the source of all my clips is also at a link down in the video description, and my clip list. These are the notes I use, somewhat cryptic notes that tell me what's in each clip. I have 10 clips here, and of course 00A, that was the screen capture you just saw of the New York Times story. But now I want to get to the news summaries, and actually this week I am not starting with NBC News' Meet the Press news summary. They did this whole like vote watch thing where they're talking about the voting system and all the stuff going on with voting, so they barely covered any of this week's stories, like the Atlantic story about Trump disparaging the troops and multiple other crazy things that went on this week, like Trump telling people to vote twice, and of course the raging coronavirus crisis. Not covered that much on Meet the Press. The place where they best covered what is the biggest story, that we're kind of at this sort of lull in the coronavirus where we're down to like 40,000 cases a day, like 850 deaths is the rolling 7-day average. But this, basically going into Labor Day, we are worse off than going into Memorial Day, and that's kind of made clear in this news summary from CBS News' Face the Nation. I think the best news summary on why are people like, they have this fatigue reporting about the fact that thousands of people are dying every week and the coronavirus is out of control in the United States, unlike most other countries. Although I'll talk a little bit more about other countries when you see the Elizabeth Palmer report that I cut off. But I will show you the whole Mark Strassman domestic report after this introduction from John Dickerson, guest hosting on CBS News' Face the Nation this week over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. Margaret is off. On this Labor Day weekend, public health officials are warning Americans to follow social distancing guidelines, especially for those celebrating the holiday with groups of people. This comes as coronavirus cases continue to rise in the Midwest, and there's concern of a new surge as the weather gets colder. We begin this morning with CBS News national correspondent Mark Strassman in Atlanta.
America wants a holiday from COVID, but a lot's riding on this Labor Day weekend. South Dakota's state fair opened, despite a startling positivity rate, 22%. New cases keep rising in 27 states, more than triple the number 2 weeks ago. The Midwest has become America's new regional hotspot. Like this Florida crowd on Friday night, Labor Day weekend could unmask complacency toward the virus. Some governors are worried sick.
Picnics, backyard barbecues, gatherings. And we know that much of the spread that's occurring in Illinois is actually happening in these settings.
America's COVID caseload, nearly 40,000 more every day, has nearly doubled since Memorial Day.
Please be very mindful of the fact that our last surge started on Memorial Day weekend when people let their guard down.
Without a vaccine in sight, America's economic recovery sputters. The national unemployment rate finally dipped below 10%. But 29 million people now collect some form of unemployment. 3.4 million jobs have vanished. Eric Beltran last worked in mid-March. Ever since, the unemployed brewer has been hammered by rejection. 150 job applications. No luck.
It almost feels like a suffocating amount of gravity, just slowly pushing harder and harder on you.
Finally, school starts on Tuesday in 30 states. Almost all learning will be virtual in cities like Chicago, Houston, Baltimore, and Detroit. New York City schools delayed their start until September 21st. America's largest school system will offer partial in-person learning to 1.1 million students.
This is uncharted territory for everyone.
Richard Carranza, chancellor of New York City schools, says nimbleness is key. One super spreader could undo months of planning.
What are you going to do then?
We hit that red line, then we go all remote until we're able to suppress it back down.
Carranza's been studying lessons learned by other school systems like Georgia's, which opened more than a month ago. COVID outbreaks forced some schools to shut down and return to all virtual teaching. But first, like school officials everywhere, he's hoping Labor Day weekend won't compound the challenge of keeping people healthy. John?
Mark Strassman, thank you. The total number of COVID-19 cases worldwide stands at 26.9 million. And the World Health Organization now says it does not expect there to be widespread vaccinations until the middle of 2021. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer reports from London.
And yeah, so Elizabeth Palmer reports from London there about what's going on with COVID in the world. Some disturbing things going on in India. Oh, look, it's Dash. He's going to pull my computer down. I actually had to take him off the table. He almost knocked down my camera. And I think now that I put him down, do I have a whole bunch of orange hairs? Like the air isn't bad enough here. And sorry about that. You probably can't see all the orange hairs floating around. What a nightmare. Anyway, I'll deal with that while we watch the next news summary. This is from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where Martha Raddatz was the guest host this week, or I guess she's the permanent alternative host, or I can't remember what her title is for this show, but she is like the co-host, I think. But she did this thing where they finally found a safe way to go around the country, and I think one of the reasons that so many of the shows focused on the, voting in the election as a more general topic is because the Labor Day weekend is kind of or is often termed the official kickoff of the final stretch of the presidential campaign for November 3rd. We're in the last couple months here, 58 days. There's still all these little orange cat hairs floating all around me. I'm going to have to... You probably can't see this, but it's like, oh, that was a bad mistake. I will try to deal with all these cat hairs everywhere while we watch Martha Raddatz in Boulder, Colorado at the end of her tour across the United States. And there's a little bit of a news introduction where they talk about the three big stories: the pandemic, the economic crisis, the racial reckoning, the protests and stuff. And then it goes into looking at voters. And I wanted to give you, I'm not going to show you the entire looking at voters across the country thing. I just wanted to show you this one guy in Pennsylvania who's pro-Biden, and then this couple in Ohio who are pro-Trump. And I'll talk about that with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. We join you this morning from Boulder, Colorado, after spending the week on a cross-country road trip speaking with voters across the nation. The background to this election: a global pandemic, a struggling economy, and massive unrest amidst calls for change. Overnight in Portland, dramatic images of firebombs thrown at officers. In Rochester, continuing demonstrations after the death of Daniel Prude in police custody. And a different uproar this morning: the president facing allegations he disparaged fallen soldiers, calling them suckers and losers. Former Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel will join me to respond in a moment. We begin, though, with the voice of the voter. For months, COVID has made it nearly impossible for us to travel the country, but this last week we were determined to safely drive across America to see close up what's behind the polls in this ever-tightening race. We begin in the state that arguably handed Donald Trump his 2016 victory, but now has Joe Biden with a narrow lead. It has been a 2,200-mile journey through America's cities and towns, some abandoned from the COVID outbreak, some far too crowded for safety, others bearing the scars of racial injustice and the fallout. But everywhere we went, the presidential election loomed, from the suburbs with manicured lawns sprouting political preferences to the heartland, where even massive wind turbines and endless fields were dominated by politics. Which is why we began our journey in the battleground state of Pennsylvania.
Well, I'm Joe Schuler. I'm a fourth-generation sheet metal worker.
And an ardent Biden supporter.
Donald Trump just lacks empathy. Joe Biden has seen tragedy in his life. I think he has the empathy this country needs right now.
And it's personal. The once friendly policy talks with neighbors have ended.
It's a lot of anger, screaming, and yelling. It's very hard to get down to the nuts and bolts of things.
As the country grapples with this contentious election, the reckoning on race is front and center. President Trump has cast himself as the law and order candidate, a message that Trump's base embraces. What do you think of Biden?
I don't trust him.
For these lifelong Hamilton, Ohio residents, Trump's word is gospel.
I think he almost walks on water.
Mary Rose Durbin says Trump is an imperfect man, but a perfect president.
Well, they couldn't buy him, and they can't control him. Every promise that he made in 2016 that he has followed through on or tried to.
And she will not be convinced otherwise, even on Trump's low support from African Americans, just 11%. Why do you think there's not more support for him in the African American community?
Oh, honey, I think there's a lot more support for him in the African American community than the media is giving credit for. And I think in November, it's going to show.
He is speaking to his avid.
And then they actually talk to someone who's African American there. And like I said, you can see the entire ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos program and that clip at the link down in the video description. Look, I rubbed in all the orange fur and it turned my shirt orange. No, that's actually I was trying to wipe the fur off and I ripped my pocket in that black shirt. So I don't know. Is this the first show where I've ever worn two different shirts? I had to change my shirt during the clip, so this was my backup shirt. I always have a backup shirt, so there you go. Like I said, I thought that that was a good look at why people vote the way they do. I was really disturbed by the pro-Trump couple, especially what he says is gospel, and this guy has lied like 20,000 times or whatever. I mean, if he said the sky was blue, I wouldn't, well, of course I'm here in Sacramento where the sky's orange for the third week in a row, but don't want to go into the whole orange thing again, but the point I'm making is that I am disturbed by people who think Trump nearly walks on water. I mean, that is a personality cult. That's why I kept that clip playing at least through the pro-Biden guy in Pennsylvania, who seemed fairly reasonable. And then, is it just me, or did they seem kind of crazy in the things they were saying? I mean, I don't know those people. I don't want to disparage strangers. I'm just disparaging the things they said on national TV, and you can let me know what you think about that down in the comment section. I'm going to move on to the next news summary. This is CNN State of the Union. Dana Bash was in for Jake Tapper this week, did a great job, but kept to Jake Tapper's practice of saying, what is the State of the Union this week? It's bracing ourselves, and it's for this final stretch of the election. Mentions the coronavirus, the racial unrest, and also that the IHME model is now saying could be 400,000 dead Americans by the end of 2020, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch this 1-minute news summary together over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in for Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is bracing ourselves. It is Labor Day weekend, the unofficial start to the final stretch of the presidential campaign. And it's 2020, so we are heading into a period that will almost certainly be like no other, as both President Trump and Democratic nominee Joe Biden try to navigate multiple crises facing the nation. The coronavirus pandemic, which has killed more than 188,000 Americans already, and which experts are warning may only get worse this fall. A critical new model says the virus could kill up to 400,000 people in the U.S. by the end of the year. The fight for racial justice, with protests across the country over videos showing the deaths of black men at the hands of police. And the economy, which is improving but still faces an unemployment rate of 8.4%. With 8 weeks to go, I sat down with the Democratic nominee for Vice President, Senator Kamala Harris. We talked in an exclusive interview.
And I will have a clip of Kamala Harris talking about election interference and voter suppression. That's my final clip number 10, if you're following along on the clip list. But I still have two more news summaries before I get to the newsmaker clips. Actually, I have one more news summary, and I've moved the NBC News Meet the Press news summary to clip number 8 because it's about the voting thing. Clip number 7, because then I have 3 clips on problems with voting and what we should expect from the voting system in the election. Like I said, there was a lot of focus on that, I think, because Labor Day is the traditional kickoff of the final stretch of the election season, and that's what Bret, who was in for Chris Wallace as the host of Fox News Sunday, talked about how we're 58 days, 8 weeks from the election. Talks about the first debate being 3 weeks away, that Chris Wallace, the normal host of Fox News Sunday, is going to be the debate moderator for the first debate on September 29th, which hopefully I will be able to do a special live clip roundup of debate clips, either on September 29th or 30th, or certainly by October 1st I should be able to put that together, so that's something to look forward to. And this news summary actually hits all the important topics. There's a brief introduction from Bret, and then they have like the two-sided. They have David Spunt reporting on the Trump campaign, and then again, like last week, Jacqui, Heinrich reporting on the Biden campaign, and they covered this whole Atlantic story more extensively than any of the other news shows. I think that's because the Trump administration spent so much time and effort trying to counter it, even though large parts of it at least seem to be true. Even confirmed by Fox News. And I will talk about all of that a little more after we watch this 4-minute news summary from Fox News Sunday this morning together over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. It's now just 58 days, 8 weeks till Election Day. And the first debate between President Trump and Joe Biden just 3 weeks away now. Coronavirus, racial unrest, and the economy, all key issues that could impact the vote. We begin with Fox team coverage. David Spunt at the White House and Jacqui Heinrich in Wilmington, Delaware. Let's start with the latest on the president's strategy as he faces re-election and that backlash over a report he mocked American soldiers killed in action. David.
Bret, good morning. The president is fuming over this report, claiming that he disparaged the American war dead. He's calling it a hoax. Meanwhile, the White House is trying to shift the focus to a potential COVID vaccine.
It's a disgrace that somebody's allowed to write things like that.
President Trump aggressively denying a report in The Atlantic, claiming he called American war dead, quote, losers and suckers.
There is nobody that feels more strongly about our soldiers, our wounded warriors, our soldiers that died in war than I do. It's a hoax.
In November 2018, the president spoke at Suresnes Cemetery outside Paris, but did not visit Ain Marne, some 61 miles east. The White House says the decision for the president to skip the visit was weather-related. Back on American soil, Portland hit its 100th day of unrest. At the same time, the president ordering a scale back of racial sensitivity training in federal agencies. In a memo, Office of Management and Budget Director Russell Vogt says the U.S. has spent millions, quote, training government workers to believe divisive anti-American propaganda. The White House instead looking to focus the attention on 1.4 million jobs added in August and a potential sustainable COVID vaccine by late October, early November. Bret, this week the president will travel to Michigan and North Carolina to hold campaign rallies. On Friday, he'll head to Pennsylvania on September 11th to memorialize Flight 93. Also in Shanksville, Pennsylvania on Friday, former Vice President Joe Biden. Bret.
David Spunt reporting from the North Lawn of the White House. David, thanks. Now let's turn to Jacqui Heinrich, who's covering the Biden campaign. Jacqui.
Good morning, Bret. Well, after more than a week on the defensive over Republican messaging about law and order, former Vice President Joe Biden is using reported comments by the president to undercut a central theme of his re-election campaign.
Who the heck does he think he is?
Joe Biden is trying to get the message across. Donald Trump is not patriotic.
President Trump has demonstrated he has no sense of service, no loyalty to any cause other than himself. I'm always cautioned not to lose my temper. This may be as close as I've come.
Biden's speech Friday was expected to make headlines on the economy and jobs, but following a report that President Trump disparaged American troops, Biden's most memorable remarks invoked the memory and military service of his own son, Beau.
The servicemen and women he served with, particularly those who did not come home, were not losers.
While Biden runs on character, his running mate is sticking to issues. Senator Kamala Harris telling CNN's State of the Union she would not trust the president's word alone on a potential coronavirus vaccine, following reports his administration is rushing a rollout for political points.
He's grasping for whatever he can get to pretend that he has been a leader on this issue when he is not.
The campaign is picking stops in swing states resonating best on the issues. Tomorrow, Labor Day, Biden heads to Pennsylvania to talk jobs with union leaders. Bret.
Jacqui Heinrich reporting from Wilmington, Delaware. Jacqui, thank you. Joining us now, Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin.
And the next clip is actually going to be Steve Mnuchin, and he's going to be talking about that Atlantic article. I didn't put a link to the Atlantic article down in the video description, but I should do that for the recorded show viewers. I'll put a link down there to the Atlantic article. It's definitely worth reading. Jeffrey Goldberg, multiple sources. Like I said, probably former White House Chief of Staff John Kelly is a source, or one of his aides or attachés, or someone very close to John Kelly is a source, and Jim Mattis, another general who I don't know why it's coming out 60 days before an election, but one thing we do know is that it was confirmed by Jennifer Griffin, a Fox News reporter, and that comes up in this. Oh, and before I get to the Steve Mnuchin clip, I do want to briefly criticize that Fox News Sunday news summary. First, they did eventually say that what the Atlantic article says about Trump is that he called them suckers and losers, people, casualties of war are suckers and losers. But I noticed that a lot of times the Fox News summaries about this issue start off saying, disparaging our troops. They never put the most awful stuff in the headline like they would if it were a Democrat, in my opinion. And I think I have multiple examples that I could use to back that up, but don't have time today to go and find them. But then you notice Jacqui Heinrich, the Biden campaign reporter, starts off saying, Biden on the defensive because of Trump's law and order message, which that is quite a framing of what's going on with the Biden campaign. And they kept saying, when Biden finally mentioned what happened in Kenosha, at the thing in Kenosha hadn't even really happened when the Democrats held their national convention, so it's a little bit disingenuous to criticize them for not mentioning Kenosha, though they could have mentioned more about the protests and the unrest on the streets. That's what Fox News and Trump want people to focus on, rather than the 190,000 dead Americans from COVID-19 and also the underlying racial issues that are the source of all the unrest. That is rarely addressed on Fox News, though it was addressed a little on Fox News Sunday, but not in clips that I took. What is addressed here with Steve Mnuchin, as I was kind of introducing earlier, this is where Baier asks Steve Mnuchin kind of a softball question, because he wasn't on the trip to France where Trump supposedly disparaged the World War I war dead as suckers and losers. One of the things that Fox News has said, well, he didn't say it about them. Our sources say he said it about people in Vietnam, like people who went to Vietnam were suckers and losers because, they didn't come up with this whole bone spurs excuse. And the bone spurs thing came up on Fox News Sunday when Bret Baier was talking to Simone Sanders from the Biden campaign, and apparently Biden got some deferments because of asthma, so it was like bone spurs versus asthma, and I don't want to go into that. But here's Steve Mnuchin getting the softball question. He wasn't on the trip, but have you ever heard Trump say, I've never heard Trump say, he's very respectful of the troops. But then you'll see Bret Baier follows up with, what's really important to Fox News is that Trump called for the firing of Jennifer Griffin, their reporter, and Steve Mnuchin's answer is, again, disingenuous because he's coming on Fox News. His boss just called on Twitter in the last 24 hours for the firing of Fox News reporter, but he doesn't know anything about it. And anyway, I pretty much pre-criticized this clip, which I will now watch with you and talk about a little more after we watch it together over here.
In the area.
You were not on that trip to France with the president. That's the focus of the Atlantic piece that has received so much attention in the past few days. Administration pushback on the record, but unnamed sources confirming parts of that story, at least parts of the account. Have you ever heard the president use any of that language about veterans dead or alive ever being around him?
Bret, quite the contrary. This president supports the military in an unbelievable way. He's created more funding to rebuild the military. That was one of the things he campaigned on, and he delivered. I've been with the president to Arlington on Memorial Day. Let me tell you, I've listened to him there. I've watched him go visit sites there. I've been with him to the anniversary of World War II. It was a very emotional experience. So, no, quite the contrary. I think this president has enormous respect for the military and for the generals. And I've been at the tank at the Pentagon with him. I've been at 9/11 at the Pentagon with him. This president respects and supports the U.S. military.
Well, the president also says he's against the cancel culture. But do you think it's right for him to call for the firing of a reporter who has unnamed sources who confirm parts of that story?
Bret, I really don't know anything about that, so it's just not something I can comment on.
Okay, well, he's tweeted about it, and obviously he says that he wants a reporter who happens to work here at Fox fired.
I've been busy on economic issues, to be honest with you. I focus on a lot of things, and as I said, on the military, I've always heard him to be 150% supportive. I'm just not aware of the issues that you're talking about.
All right, last thing. The CBO says the national debt will reach.
He doesn't know anything about that. I don't know anything about that. I've been focusing on economic issues. I don't know, is that a good Steve Mnuchin impression? I don't know anything about that. I don't know. I don't do many impressions, but I think I can do a Steve Mnuchin because he's kind of like a caricature, like he's like almost a cartoon character, I guess. Well, you can tell me what you think if I nailed the essence of Steve Mnuchin there, but like I pre-criticized that clip, saying, like I said, but I think it's, like I said before I showed the clip, it's kind of interesting that the main thing that Fox News is worried about is how Trump is calling for the firing of their reporter, and like Bret Baier held that back. Like, you know, a reporter who confirmed that. Why is Trump calling, you know, he doesn't believe in cancel culture, right? And that's totally bogus because he's called for the firing. I mean, he was trying to get people fired in the NFL who are, or any sport, who are kneeling for the national anthem. They should be fired, right? Those sons of bitches, didn't he say that? So it's not like Trump doesn't believe in cancel culture when he wants somebody canceled, but that was an interesting point from Bret Baier. But like I said, it was mostly concentrating on how their reporter, Jennifer Griffin, was being threatened by the President of the United States. I don't know if they would have focused so much on the Trump tweet if it hadn't been, you know, I mean, doesn't Trump call out multiple reporters, multiple networks, CNN's fake news, you're you know, calling reporters terrible people, all of his rallies, and that doesn't get a lot of coverage from Fox News. But when it's a Fox News reporter, all of a sudden they care. So I just wanted to point that out. And before I get to the last four voting clips, I want to show this one CBS News Face the Nation clip. I said that their news summary is more like spot on in that it focused on the coronavirus more than any of the other shows. And one of the things I've said about CBS News Face the Nation, I pointed out since it happened back in January and February, there were weeks where they were the only network who did stories on this new virus out in Wuhan, China. And at the time I said, you know, they're either like overhyping this story or they're the only one of the big five corporate outlets who has identified what's the most important story. And it turned out to be number two. CBS News Face the Nation, I criticize it for a lot of things a lot of the time, but that was one thing that they did really well at the beginning of the year, is they were the only corporate news outlet that focused on coronavirus. I think it was like 2 or 3 different weeks in January and February when no one else, it was all like impeachment and no one was covering it. So that was also a tradition that I thought was carried on well by Face the Nation this week, where they did a lot of coverage of coronavirus, like I showed in their news summary in clip number 1. But then they also had on Scott Gottlieb, who I usually don't take clips from because he doesn't actually have a current title or position, but he's the former commissioner of the FDA before Stephen Hahn in the Trump administration. So he worked with Trump, he knows about Trump, and he worked at the FDA. And he kind of gives the details of what you heard in the CBS News Face the Nation news summary at the beginning about how our position now for Labor Day is worse than before Memorial Day. And basically things are, I mean, you can't predict the future. Maybe things are going to be better than one would expect based on the data and the science, but Scott Gottlieb is basically saying we're pretty screwed for the fall. and the winter, we're screwed. As I will talk about with you after we watch that clip together over here.
He's in Westport, Connecticut. Good morning, Scott. I want to jump right in. Give us an update on where things stand now here on Labor Day.
Well, if you look at where we are heading into Labor Day relative to where we were heading into Memorial Day, we have an equivalent amount, if not more, infection heading into Labor Day right now. And we're heading into a more difficult season. We're heading into the fall and the winter when we would expect a respiratory pathogen like a coronavirus to start spreading more aggressively than it would in the summertime. Looking at Memorial Day, we had about 40,000 people hospitalized. We were diagnosing about 21,000 new cases a day and had about 1,100 deaths. Now, notwithstanding the fact that we've made really significant gains in reducing in-hospital mortality and reducing length of stay in the hospitals for patients who are hospitalized for COVID right now. As of yesterday, we had about 35,000 people hospitalized. We're diagnosing about 40,000 infections a day. And on a 7-day moving average, we have about 850 tragic deaths a day. So that's a lot of infection to be taking into a season when we know a respiratory pathogen is going to want to spread more aggressively. And the other backdrop here is that people are exhausted. People have been social distancing and wearing masks and staying home for a long period of time right now. Small businesses are hurting. So I think that people's willingness to comply with the simple things that we know can reduce spread is going to start to fray as we head into the fall and the winter. And that's another challenge, trying to keep up our vigilance at a time when we know that this can spread more aggressively.
So, Dr. Gottlieb, just to remind us all why the fall and winter are considered worse than the summer, why is it that we wanted to be in a better position going into the fall than, say, some other season?
Epidemiology of spread for a respiratory pathogen changes in the wintertime, in the fall and the winter. Typically in the summer, you see viruses spread that are spread through food, things that are ingested. In the wintertime, you see respiratory pathogens spread more aggressively, in part because people are indoors more. They're in congregate settings where respiratory pathogens can spread more efficiently, in part because there is some impact of the cold weather on your ability to protect your upper airway from respiratory pathogens. But we know that the epidemiology of spread changes, and that's when you see these respiratory pathogens like coronavirus or respiratory syncytial virus or flu. That's when you see these pathogens start to spread. Typically, a coronavirus isn't a summer pathogen. It's a seasonal pathogen that really manifests itself in the fall, the winter. And there's a lot of circulating strains of coronavirus that cause nothing more than the common cold, and typically they only circulate in the fall and the winter time.
Was I right? Are we screwed? Like the summer, as Trump, tried to say in one of his awful press conferences, when it gets warmer, it's going to go away. Well, no, when it gets warmer, people don't have to be inside with the windows closed, huddled together as much. And so we should have used that time to really eradicate spread of coronavirus, but we didn't. We have got things down to a plateau, like I was saying at the beginning of the show, like 40,000 new cases per day, like 800 people dying per day. That is not eradication. That is a dangerously high level to be going into the fall and the winter, when coronaviruses traditionally flourish. One thing Scott Gottlieb didn't say there is it's also flu season. I actually have an appointment to get my flu shot next Saturday. A lot of places are giving them out early. If you can get a flu shot, go get your flu shot, because a lot of the symptoms of the flu are the same as the symptoms of the coronavirus. And that's one of the other, as flu cases go up, many people die of the flu every year, and they are going to be inundating the same hospitals, emergency rooms, and intensive care units that the COVID-19 patients are going to need. And the confluence of those two diseases are another reason. That's the one thing Scott Gottlieb didn't really mention there, but another reason that we are quite likely totally screwed in the next few months here in the United States. It's September, finally, 2020. The worst year that I can remember is finally winding down, but not winding down in terms of how bad things are going to be. I think it's only going to get worse, and that was one reason there, but the other reason has to do with the election and the likelihood that President Trump won't accept the results of the election. He's already trying to show, and I'm now transitioning to the final 4 clips on the whole voting issue, voting and elections issue. But before I do that, I want to thank the Super Chat contributors. I got a whole bunch of those along the way here. I tried to get it. Here's a screenshot. So yeah, thanks to Matthew and Sexy Bob and Lulu Girl. Matthew gave a couple there, and Sexy Bob and Lulu Girl all multiple contributions. So that's, last week's show, as I predicted, because it had footage of violence in Portland and violence in Kenosha, got demonetized even on Human Review. I don't know what's going to happen to this week's video, but there was some footage in those news summaries of violence in certain cities, though I didn't really put it in my search tags and video description. We'll see what happens this week, but that's why I appreciate the Super Chat contributors, the people who are my monthly patrons on Patreon. There's a link down in the video description if you want to be a Patreon patron. There's also a join button down there below the video. On YouTube, you can become a YouTube member. There's a PayPal link down there. At the $5 level on PayPal and Patreon, I give you this hashtag LiberalViewer weatherproof vinyl sticker. And at the $10 level, you get the sticker and this ACLU Constitution. So that you can understand many things that our President Donald Trump does not understand, because many things, well, I don't know how much he reads at all, but I'm pretty sure he has never read the United States Constitution, at least not and understood it. But so I wanted to briefly pause there and thank my supporters in all those different ways, and of course all of you who just join me and give your comments, your supportive comments especially. I hear people complaining about right-wing trolls in the live comment section. I don't have time to read all the comments during the live show, because I'm doing the job of the online personality. I'm doing all the production and the engineering, and I even had to do a costume change, so I'm really busy. So anyway, I'm sorry if there are too many right-wing trolls there. Maybe if I keep doing this show beyond January 2021, I'll get a moderator in there to at least put people in timeout or come up with some rules. But so anyway, these last 4 news clips are on the problems with the voting system, especially one thing that I said a few weeks ago about mail-in voting, which we've had here in Sacramento County for a couple election cycles. And one thing I've noticed about it, and I mentioned this a few weeks ago, is you don't get to find out who won on election day. Like there was a sheriff's election here in 2018, and we weren't sure if there was going to be a runoff. There were a few different candidates. The sheriff ended up winning by like 51% of the vote, but it took a couple weeks because there were all these mail-in ballots. If you mail in your ballot on election day and it gets postmarked on election day, your vote counts. So that means it can take quite a while for those ballots to come in. And on Meet the Press, they are doing this whole Vote Watch program on multiple, or doing this whole Vote Watch series on multiple programs, including on Meet the Press, that Chuck Todd explains at the beginning of the news summary. That was at the very beginning of Meet the Press. Like I said, they didn't focus on the news of the week, but they did focus on this whole Vote Watch series that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that NBC News Meet the Press news summary together over here.
Good Sunday morning and a happy Labor Day weekend to everyone. Not only may this actually be the most important election in our lifetime, it certainly will be the most unusual or unlike any election in our lifetime. This year, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, for the first time, a majority of Americans say they plan to vote early. And that has huge consequences. According to this week's NBC News SurveyMonkey poll, 52% of Americans say they plan to vote early. 33% of them by mail, 19% early in person. But there is a huge split between how Democrats and Republicans plan to vote. 54% of those who lean Republican plan to vote on Election Day in person, while among those who lean Democratic, 71% plan to vote by mail or early in person. That is all but certain to lead to an election night in which President Trump may appear to be leading because those Election Day votes are counted first and are Republican leaning, only to fall behind Joe Biden in the following days and even weeks as mostly Democratic mail-in votes are counted. There are so many questions surrounding this election. Will President Trump declare victory on election night and insist that mail-in ballots counted afterwards are fraudulent? Will the Postal Service be able to get those ballots in on time? Will hurdles be put in place to make it more difficult for Black and Hispanic voters to get to the polls? How many mail-in ballots will be disqualified and why? And could weeks of legal challenges make 2000 and its hanging chads seem simple and quaint? Those are just some of the issues we're trying to deal with all this week on Vote Watch on NBC News and MSNBC, starting with this special edition of Meet the Press. And we're going to begin with the crush of expected mail-in votes in an election the likes of which we have never seen.
It's my greatest concern, my single greatest concern. This president's going to try to steal this election.
They're trying to steal the election from the Republicans.
The stakes could not be higher as the two parties clash over how to conduct an election in the middle of a global health crisis. More than 190 million Americans in 44 states are eligible to cast a vote by mail without an excuse beyond the coronavirus. In 2016, 33 million voters, or about 1/4, voted by mail. This time, it could be more than twice that number. For months, the president is engaged in a campaign against mail-in voting, though he is voting by mail himself, to delegitimize the results of the election if he loses.
Voting by mail is wrought with fraud and abuse. If you do universal mail-ins with millions and millions of ballots, you're never going to know what the real result of an election is. I don't like this mail-in ballot deal.
A Washington Post analysis found just 372 cases of voter fraud out of 14.6 million votes cast by mail in the 2016 and 2018 elections alone.
Academics have studied this, lawyers have studied this, the government has studied this, Democrats have studied this, Republicans have studied this, and no one can find any evidence of rampant voter fraud.
The president's fear of mail-in voting may be rooted in the 2016 election, when he overperformed on Election Day in key battleground states. In Florida, for instance, Hillary Clinton led before Election Day by 247,000 votes. Trump won Election Day voters by 360,000 and won the state. In the fight over mail-in voting, the Postal Service has become a flashpoint after an urgent warning last month to dozens of states that it cannot guarantee all mail-in ballots will be counted. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy backtracked before Congress.
The Postal Service is fully capable and committed to delivering the nation's ballots securely and on time.
Will you put the high-speed machines
back?
No,
I will not.
You will not?
Will not.
You will not. Well, there you go.
There I go what?
The chaotic primary cycle has exposed problems that are warning signs for November.
So it was just a complete mess of a system.
It took Pennsylvania 28 days to count all its primary votes. In New York, it was 42 days. And states like Wisconsin, Georgia, and Texas were plagued by long lines at the polls, 11th hour court rulings, and failing voting machines.
It is pouring out here. How long have you been waiting? About 3 hours. You've been waiting here about 3 hours.
We stood in line and we kept hearing, there's machines coming. We didn't know if things were broken. It made me think this must be what voter suppression looks like.
If you have a 69, 70% voter turnout in our presidential election in November, that could take days.
And experts worry a long timeline could erode voter confidence in the election and become fertile ground for disinformation campaigns.
If the election results are close, will you trust them?
there's a mail-in, I don't trust that at all.
I would like to say yes, but sometimes back of my mind, I don't know.
And joining me now are two men who have represented their respective parties for years and know as well as anyone what we might expect this November. It's Democratic election lawyer Mark Elias and recently retired veteran Republican election lawyer Ben Ginsberg. And when we say recent...
And I don't have any clips of Mark Elias or Ben Ginsberg, but those are both both of them are great election law attorneys, and they had some important things to say about that topic. Like I said, there's a link down in the video description to NBC News' Meet the Press. You can watch the entire program, and I don't know, it shows up eventually as free. You might have to have cable or some other whatever. I can't guarantee you'll be able to access that immediately, but eventually, hopefully, you'll be able to watch that if you click on the link down in the video description. I did take a clip. He had first, I thought that was a great news summary about some of the issues we might be facing on Election Day. I sort of criticized Meet the Press for not covering the news of the week, but they did cover some really important issues in that news summary over 5 minutes there I just showed, and I wouldn't have taken that clip if I didn't think it was important, informative, and something worth discussing, and keeping in mind that Election Day might not be the end of the November 3rd election. It might take, like I was saying before I showed the clip, it might take a couple weeks to count all the mail-in ballots if they can be mailed on Election Day, as long as they're received. It depends on the state, but some states have like postmark +3. Some, well, you'll see different. I think there are some states where it can be a couple weeks. They wait a couple weeks to receive the mail-in ballots, and I hope that the post office isn't slowing that down. That was briefly addressed with the Louis DeJoy clips, our Postmaster General, who apparently also reimbursed some of the people in his, some of the employees in his corporation for contributing to the Republicans. That was a breaking story I saw. I haven't verified, but I saw that headline before I started the show. That was too much breaking news to make it into any of the Sunday morning news analysis shows I'm taking my clips from. But this next clip is also from NBC News' Meet the Press. Chuck Todd had on representatives, secretaries of state from Ohio, Michigan, and I can't remember the third state, but all three of them are going to be in this 4-person shot at the beginning of this clip from NBC News' Meet the Press with Chuck Todd and the 3 election officers from 3 different states. It might have been Pennsylvania, I'm not sure. But I'm going to show you the clip of Jocelyn Benson from Michigan saying that, don't think of it as Election Day, think of it as Election Week. Although you'll see at the beginning of this clip, Chuck Todd starts off introducing it with the Secretary of State from Ohio saying that he thinks Ohio is going to be a quick counting state, but that you'll see kind of the same thing from Ohio Governor Mike DeWine in the clip after next from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, also saying, it might take a while to get all the votes in Ohio and Michigan counted. It's not going to be on election night. But anyway, here's Chuck Todd talking to the Secretary of State of Michigan about their process and how long, just be patient. Wait for the votes to be counted accurately in this clip.
I know Ohio, I know Frank Lewis, I know you guys process early, which brings me to you, Jocelyn Benson of Michigan. You guys can't start processing until Election Day. It took a long time to get some results during your primary. Should we be prepared for Thanksgiving and the Michigan results to be coming together?
No, but we should be prepared for this to be closer to an election week as opposed to an election day. I mean, the bottom line is we are not going to have the full results and accounting of all of our ballots on election night. We already know that. And we've asked the legislature to make changes to the law to give us more ability to be prepared and count those ballots more efficiently. They have not acted for reasons that I don't completely understand. But that said, we're increasing tabulators, we're increasing capacity to more efficiently and securely count those ballots. But I'm also laser focused on accuracy. And if it takes a few extra days to ensure we have a full and accurate counting of the results of every race, that's what it's going to take. And we're going to be transparent throughout that whole process to make sure every citizen knows exactly where we are in the counting process and how many more ballots we have to get through.
Are you concerned that people may take the delay in getting all the results in Michigan to declare a phony winner?
Yes, but to me, that's just going to be another example of the type of misinformation and disinformation that we're seeing in multiple ways from multiple platforms and voices in this election cycle. So we're going to counter that misinformation with truth and accuracy. These are the ballots that have been counted and reported. This is where the work is still happening, and we'll continue to keep the public updated. And again, being that source of trusted information, of clear facts and data is going to be really important for every Secretary of State this year as we seek to cut through lots of different rhetoric. That's going to only be increasing in the weeks coming up to Election Day and beyond.
Frank LaRose, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida.
So there you saw the Secretary of State of Michigan saying, wait, be patient. We may not know the winner of Michigan on November 3rd. It might take a while, but we want to get an accurate count of all the votes, especially all the mail-in votes during the coronavirus. So don't let Trump claim victory on November 3rd if the result is still in question, although hopefully the landslide against Trump will be so overwhelming that already on the night of November 3rd, everyone's going to know that, maybe the Democrats will win Texas. Or, I mean, that's what I hope. I don't know what you all think, but that would be the most productive end to this terrible chapter in American history where we have the worst modern American president, Donald Trump, who is probably, I'm no psychologist, but he seems like all the evidence of his behavior that I've had to watch ad nauseum for hours and hours. I've watched all of his press conferences, which have multiplied during coronavirus. He took a break for like a month where he didn't do them, but except for that break, since March, there's been like almost every day a Trump press conference and his rallies with people without masks. And malignant narcissism, that was the psychological diagnosis I wanted to put out there, despite my own lack of credentials to make that diagnosis. But the guy does not have empathy. The guy is, well, you can let me know what you think about Donald Trump's character down in the comment section. I want to move on to that was Jocelyn Benson. I think she might be a Democrat, but I don't actually know. But this next guest, this is a Republican, the Republican governor of Ohio, Mike DeWine, talking to Martha Raddatz over on This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Also, Martha Raddatz starts the conversation by mentioning something that would be a huge scandal in any other presidential administration if the president came out and said, my supporters, I want you to vote by mail and then go in and vote again in person, which is generally a felony. Most states, the laws are different state to state, but kudos to Martha Raddatz for actually mentioning that at the beginning of her questioning of Mike DeWine. but then also giving him a chance to explain what you also heard from Jocelyn Benson in the last clip, that, you know, it might take a week or so to get the results of the November 3rd election, including in Michigan and Ohio, as I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
And I want to turn to President Trump and the election. He continues to sow confusion about vote-by-mail efforts. This week he encouraged voters in North Carolina to vote twice. I am going to assume you would not condone that sort of illegal behavior there in Ohio. But what are your concerns going into Election Day? You can do mail-in ballots up to the day before the election. This is going to be a very different election night, and it could go on for a long time. What are your concerns?
Well, Martha, I can only speak to Ohio. I've talked extensively with Frank LaRose, our Secretary of State. We have a very good system in Ohio. For many years, 2 decades, I think, voters have been able to vote absentee with no reason. They can just ask for an absentee ballot. The Secretary of State tells me that we're at least double over the requests that we normally would receive now. So we're used to doing this. We have very extensive voting. People not only can vote absentee for any reason they want to, but they also can vote in person at the Board of Elections during the week. Then we even have Sunday voting in Ohio the weekend before the election. So ample opportunity. What we tell people to do is, look, everyone, by the way, is now getting in the mail, their application. They can fill that out. Every voter in Ohio is getting it. They can fill that out. They can send that in. They'll get their absentee ballot back. We're asking people, if you're going to vote that way, to do it as early as you can. The other thing, Ohio law provides that the ballot can be counted up until 10 days after the election, as long as it's postmarked, by the Monday. So again, we don't want anybody to wait till the Friday before to mail it, but they also have the ability to drop off at the Board of Elections, a drop box at the Board of Elections. So we're not concerned about Ohio. We always have to be vigilant. Our elections in Ohio and across this country are held in a very bipartisan way, from the precinct where you have Democrats and Republicans to the county level and with the Secretary of State running the election. So we're confident things are going to work out fine as far as casting the ballot and counting the ballot in Ohio.
We hope that will as well. I enjoyed very much crossing through your state. Thanks for.
And so there, like I said, you see a Republican governor and I think a Democratic Secretary of State of Republican governor of Ohio, Democratic Secretary of State of Michigan, saying, be patient, wait for the votes to be counted. One of the people I follow on Twitter, and for some reason Twitter is always showing me tweets from right-wing people I follow, because I guess when I see outrageous tweets from right-wing people, I'm more likely to respond. I actually responded to a tweet from Charlie Kirk a couple, if you want to follow me on Twitter, there's a link down in the video description. It's twitter.com/LiberalViewer, or just search LiberalViewer on Twitter, and if you're on Twitter, you can follow me. I responded to something. If you don't know who Charlie Kirk is, he's this. He was a college student at one time, I think, who founded this group of conservative college students called Turning Point USA. I followed him actually because he followed me. He still follows me, although the chance that he actually reads anything I ever tweet is pretty low. And he shows up on Fox News all the time. I heard, I think, that he didn't actually graduate from college because he gets all this money from the Koch brothers, who are these libertarian right-wing, well, one of them's dead now, but in any case, now I'm going way off on a tangent, but I'm just saying that if you follow me on Twitter, I responded to Charlie Kirk about Joe Biden being the most corrupt president in history. I don't think so, because I'm old enough to remember Spiro T. Agnew, who was a Republican an admitted felon, vice president to Richard M. Nixon. Anyway, I don't even remember why I got off on this whole Twitter tangent. Oh, that's right, because I want to get to the last clip on this. I showed how Trump was claiming on Twitter that the election is going to be rigged. That you saw that in the Meet the Press voter watch news summary I showed at the beginning of this topic. And anyway, the last clip I want to show is actually from CNN State of the Union. Dana Bash asked the vice presidential running mate of Joe Biden about whether Russia was going to throw the election to Donald Trump. And anyway, I want to show that last news clip, and I'll read your comments, and you can let me know what you think about what Kamala Harris is saying, both about Russia election interference she's basically says that they interfered in 2016, which is true. She doesn't talk about 2020 so much, but she then goes into the whole thing about voter suppression, which is also true, which I will talk about with you after we watch that final news clip together over here.
I want to ask about Russia. Yeah. The Department of Homeland Security bulletin said that Russia is trying to amplify claims that mail-in voting will lead to widespread voting fraud and undermine the public's trust in the upcoming election. Are you worried that Russian interference could cost you the election?
I am clear that Russia interfered in the election of President of the United States in 2016. I serve on the Senate Intelligence Committee. We have published detailed reports about exactly what we believe happened. And I do believe that there will be foreign interference in the 2020 election and that Russia will be at the front of the line.
Could it cost you the White House?
Theoretically, of course. Yes.
And that's based on what you're hearing publicly, or you mentioned you're on the Senate Intelligence
Listen,
Committee.
let me just tell you something. We have to be a realist, and I'm a realist about it. Joe's a realist about it. We have classic voter suppression at play in this election coming up, where after the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act with Shelby v. Holder in 2013, dozens of states passed laws that were designed to suppress the black vote, to suppress students from voting, to suppress our indigenous people from voting, so much so that in North Carolina, a court of appeals said the law was passed with surgical precision to get in the way of black voters from voting. So we have classic voter suppression. We have what happened in 2016, which is foreign interference. We have a president who is trying to convince the American people not to believe in the integrity of our election system and compromise their belief that their vote might actually count. These things are all at play. And I am very realistic, Joe is very realistic about the fact that until we can win and get in and put some teeth back in the Voting Rights Act and bring back the public's confidence in the system, that there will be many obstacles that people are intentionally placing in front of Americans' ability to vote. But we will surpass and surmount and get around those obstacles.
President Trump, Vice President Pence, they've been campaigning more and more on the issue of
law and order. But like I said, if you want to watch, I think at the link down in the video description, you can pretty easily watch the entire State of the Union program. The easiest one to watch is CBS News Face the Nation, because the link goes to their YouTube channel where they pretty much every week upload the entire Face the Nation program split into clips on their Face the Nation YouTube channel. But you can tell me what you think about Kamala Harris there, talking both about Russia interference and voter suppression, also talking about how the Voting Rights Act was gutted by the Supreme Court and Congress could easily fix it, haven't done it, and it's allowed all these states to put into place these laws that make it harder and harder to vote. I don't know what's going to happen in the next couple months, but as we've learned from the last few clips, we shouldn't necessarily expect a result of the election on the night of November 3rd. It might take a while, it might take a week, might take a few weeks. The most important thing, Twitter. The most important thing is to get an accurate count, not a quick count. And between the last two clips, I went off on this tangent about Twitter, and I totally lost my train of thought, and I forgot the point I was trying to make, which was, if you've been following me on YouTube for a long time, you know I used to have a YouTube nemesis, Lee Doran. The name of his YouTube channel was How the World Works, and he also has a Twitter account, Lee Doran, which I think is protected. I don't know how easy it is to follow, but because I've known him for a long time, I follow him on Twitter, and Twitter always gives me these people, like I was saying, Charlie Kirk and Steven Crowder and Lee Doran. Twitter's always showing me their tweets, like maybe because they know that's the thing that's going to get me riled up and want to answer. And Lee Doran, in one of his tweets, said, the longer I can't remember exactly what he said in his tweet, but I think it was aimed at the press, because he's always going after the press, which is, of course, a really easy target because it's so amorphous and non-specific. I used to do all my Fox News bias videos where I actually had to do research and find things that Fox News actually said and show how it's not true. But Lee Doran does all these tweets about how the press said something, and the press, who is the press? But anyway, he talked about how the press is accepting this idea, or the press is saying that, or the longer it takes for an election result, the more chance there is of fraud. I think that was his statement. And, or the press should anyone in the press who doesn't say this is garbage or something like that, that the longer it takes to find the results of the election, the more chance there is of fraud. Well, the logical result of that statement is the most or the least fraudulent election result that we could get at this moment is one announced right now. Right now. The earlier you announce it, it doesn't matter if the election hasn't even happened. Sooner is better. That's what that argument is, and it's not true. Sometimes the most accurate result comes from waiting and counting and getting all the votes, all the mail-in votes received that were postmarked by election day. That's not fraud. That's accurate counting. And that's the point I was trying to make before the last clip, and I went off on a tangent and I forgot my train of thought, but I'm glad that I didn't finish the video without pointing out what I should have tweeted to my former YouTube nemesis, Lee Doran, aka How the World Works. Anyway, that's for my longtime YouTube fans and subscribers from 5, 10, 12 years ago, whatever. But anyway, that's my last news clip. I actually have two. That's right. I wore two shirts. I'm going to give you two Dash and Sandy clips before I finish the show. The first one is from this morning. I knew I was going to have to do the show early, so I have a Dash and Sandy clip from when I fed Sandy this morning. It's like 6 a.m. I may or may not have some vocalization from Sandy, but definitely vocalization from Dash in this clip. Okay, I think I started the video right after Sandy made her noise, but there was a little Sandy butt sniffing at the end. I don't know what that was all about, but there was definitely some vocalizations from Dash, and you saw Dash live in my lap earlier, making me have to change my shirt. But then I have a bonus Dash and Sandy clip. You know, the air here is terrible. For 3 weeks in a row, here's the latest. I'm in the big red area you see here. I don't think you could see that. I have to double the size. Here you go. So I'm in that big red area with, you saw Sacramento there. But that doesn't mean that Dash and Sandy don't have to go out and come back in. And here is a brief 4-second clip of just proving, I have to keep opening the door and letting the bad air in, which makes my life so much more difficult. In this 4-second final bonus Dash and Sandy clip, a dandy clip, as if you will, over here. Could you even see Dash at the beginning of that clip? Well, whatever. We've had more than enough Dash this week. Thank you all for joining me. Thanks especially early. I appreciate all of you who... I see some extra Super Chat contributions at the end. Tom Trask, more from Sexy Bob and Lulu Girl, and Dr. Zilla, thank you. 2 Dash and Sandy clips. So I guess I've been rewarded for the bonus Dash and Sandy clip, and probably be back at the regular time next week, but I appreciate all of you who showed up early, all of you who watched the recorded show. I will be back next Sunday and every Sunday at least through January 20th, 2021, when hopefully Joe Biden will be inaugurated as the 46th president, because Trump must go. Isn't that my topic? Trump must go. Join with me. Trump must go. Trump must go. Anyway, that's the end of the show, and until next week, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.